Meet the Ojibwa by Barbara Brooks Simons. Who are the Ojibwa? The Ojibwa were one of the largest American Indian groups. Their lands covered a wide area. Most Ojibwa lived near the Great Lakes. They lived in many bands, but they shared a culture. They spoke the same language. Their allies were the Potawatomi and Ottawa. Together, they formed the Council of Three Fires. Their chief enemies were the Iroquois and the Sioux. People in the cool forests shared a way of life. They farmed and hunted. Other Ojibwa moved west. They lived like the Plains Indians, hunting buffalo and living in teepees. Today, the Ojibwa are still a large group. More than 100,000 live in the United States. The center of their homeland is Lake Superior. They live in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. About 75,000 live in southern Canada. People often call the Ojibwa Chippewa. Others use Ojibwe. Those are just different spellings of one word. French and English settlers heard it wrong. To see why, say Ochippewa quickly. The Ojibwa called themselves the Anishinabeg, which means original people. Did you know the word Ojibwa means puckered? It described the way the Ojibwa sewed moccasins. The map shows where the Ojibwa lived. Chapter 1. How the Ojibwa used to live. Thick forests once covered eastern North America. Sparkling rivers ran through the woods. Small and huge lakes dotted the land. This was the Ojibwa's home. In winter, families lived in the forests. They traveled across the snow on snowshoes. In summer, they moved to the shores of rivers and lakes. The Ojibwa traveled the rivers and lakes in birch bark canoes. It took more than a week to make a canoe. Long sheets of birch bark covered a cedar frame. Women sewed the strips to the frame. A birch bark canoe was strong but light. The Ojibwa used the canoe to fish and to trade goods. The Ojibwa used maple syrup as sugar. Often, people had to cross a small strip of land between lakes. This was called a portage. A canoe had to be light enough to carry. The canoe was the perfect way to travel. The Ojibwa got food from the land around them. Women planted corn and pumpkins. They picked plump wild berries. Women ground acorns into flour and baked sweet cakes. Spring was the time for maple syrup. People from several villages met at a sugaring. They hammered wedges into the bark. Thin, pale brown sap ran out. They caught it in containers. They boiled it down to make maple syrup. Fall brought another important food. The margins of the lakes were shallow and muddy. Wild rice grew there. When it was ripe, people gathered it from boats. The Ojibwa also caught silvery fish with nets. Men hunted moose and deer. The bravest went after bears. That took nerve when a fierce bear bared its sharp teeth. More often, they trapped smaller animals, like rabbits or beaver. The Ojibwa used all parts of the animals they hunted. They made rabbit stew. Rabbit fur made warm blankets. Men wore leather leggings. Women wore long deerskin dresses. For cold weather, they had fur cloaks. Everyone wore soft deerskin shoes called moccasins, or moccasin. The Ojibwa wore many layers of clothes to protect them against the cold. Making animal hides into soft leather was hard work. Women and girls scraped and softened the skins. It took days. Then they stretched them to dry. Later they sewed the soft skins into clothes and shoes. They trimmed them with beadwork. Ojibwa women were skillful with their hands. Their beautiful beadwork astonished people. They used hundreds of tiny colored beads to make flower designs. They decorated clothes and moccasins with their beadwork designs. Later, European traders came. They had calico, wool, and velvet cloth. They also brought cooking pots and metal sewing needles. The Ojibwa traded furs or maple sugar for these goods. Later, European traders came. They had calico, wool, and velvet cloth. They also brought cooking pots and metal sewing needles. The Ojibwa traded furs or maple sugar for these goods. This man's headdress shows the fine beadwork made by Ojibwa women. Wigwams were a cozy place for the family to gather. Winters in the North Woods are long and cold. The traditional Ojibwa house was a wigwam. It was made of strips of birch bark. They were sewed onto an upright wooden frame. A birch bark house could be cozy in winter. A fire in the central fire pit kept the house warm. Families gathered around the fire to tell stories. Women sewed. Children played with dolls or games. Still, sometimes they almost ran out of food during the winter. Everyone was happy when spring arrived. The government made treaties or agreements with the American Indians. Some groups gave up land. Others kept the right to hunt and fish in certain places. But settlers often ignored the treaties and took their land. Indians and settlers fought over land. The government sent in soldiers who made the Indians leave their lands. Villages were deserted. The people had to move far away. Most Ojibwa stayed, but they lost much of their land. This is Okemekee-Quid, an early leader of the Ojibwa. The Ojibwa fought to keep their traditions and stay together. In the late 1800s, officials tried a new idea. They reasoned that Indians should be like everyone else. They tried to banish Indian culture. People could not practice traditional religion. They could not teach the Ojibwa language. Many children were taken from their homes. Few families were spared. The children went to boarding schools where they learned only English. Some even went to live with non-Indian families. Finally, the government saw this was a bad idea. They saw the value of Indian culture. They gave the Indians more rights. Chapter 3. How the Ojibwa Live Today. Today, the Ojibwa can govern themselves. American Indians have a special place in the United States. Indians are United States citizens. They are also citizens of their groups or nations. Each nation has its piece of land called a reservation. The reservation has its own government, which makes laws for the community. Indian police enforce the laws. Once, only men could lead a tribe. Today, most elect their leader, and it is often a woman. Many reservations have libraries and hospitals. Some have community colleges. Winona LaDuke is an Ojibwa who ran for vice president of the Green Party in 2000. Many Indians work to save their culture. Local schools teach native languages. Most Ojibwa people today speak English. Many also speak Ojibwa. Some Indian groups hold powwows or special gatherings. Here people celebrate their culture. They dance, sing, see friends and relatives, and have a good time. Powwows can last from just a few hours to a week. People wear traditional dress for the special dances. The Ojibwa still celebrate their old traditions. Did you know? Some English words that come from the Ojibwa language are moccasin, moose, pecan, and toboggan. Did you know? Many place names in the upper Midwest come from American Indian languages. Those from Ojibwa include Mississippi, Milwaukee, Bemidji, and Sheboygan. Today, many Ojibwa go to college. On the reservation, some still follow traditional ways. They hunt and fish. They do beadwork and other crafts. They may wear moccasins or beaded shirts, but they live in houses or apartments. They build wigwams just for holidays. They wear jeans, not leggings and feathers. Most Ojibwa live like modern Americans. Some have moved to cities. Many go to college. Some come back to the reservation, but some don't. Some Ojibwa fight for Indian political rights. Others have new careers. One famous Ojibwa is writer Louise Erdrich. She is a member of the Turtle Mountain Band. Even though the Ojibwa live like other Americans today, they value and preserve their traditions. Glossary. Culture. Shared way of life, beliefs, and customs of a group of people. Plains Indians. American Indian groups who lived on the plains of the Midwest, hunted buffalo, and lived in wigwams. Portage. Path between two waterways. Powwow. An American Indian special gathering where Indians dance, sing, and see friends and relatives. Reservation. Area of land reserved by the government for a certain group of American Indians. Teepee. Cone-shaped tent made of buffalo skin made by Plains Indians. Treaty. A formal agreement between two groups. Wigwam. Typical birch bark house made by Ojibwa and other American Indians who lived in woodlands. Responding. Target vocabulary. Word builder. Have you ever had to take a deep breath before doing something? What you did probably took courage or nerve. List things that take nerve and tell why you think so. Copy the chart and add words. Write about it. Text to self. The Ojibwa did many things that took nerve. Write a paragraph about something they did that you think took nerve. Tell what it was and why it took nerve. Use words from the chart in your writing. Target vocabulary. Astonished, banish, bared, deserted, envy, margins, nerve, reasoned, spared, upright. Target strategy. Infer, predict. Use text clues to figure out what isn't directly stated by the author. Word teaser. Break this word into two parts and it gives you directions.